So I know that a bunch of you were in here yesterday and we talked about the chlorophyll, the mesozooplankton, and the permeability productivity that we used hot as our exemplar. Those are the templates we developed in Boston when we had our little hack week meeting. And then there was also a group that was looking at particulate fluxes, which has a pretty long template. And I think it got some reorganization yesterday. And so I thought maybe, I imagine a lot of you who were in here will be going to look at other, maybe the biogeochemistry and the particulate fluxes today. They did some reorganizing of the particulate fluxes template because it's such a long list of measurements that are taken. And I was hoping that Pierluigi might come up and talk a little bit about how it got reorganized. And I'm wondering if that's the approach we should be taking for all of the templates or, yeah, I feel like we need to be consistent, whatever approach that we take, so.
Or even just socializing everybody to.
I'm going to.
We were a very small group.
I'm gonna share for all of you online, I'm gonna share screen too.
Yeah, so what happened there, what happened in this group, when I was asked to look at the full template, I realized that, this is reaching a critical mass stage where there are many, many parameters, many properties, as we would call them. A property describes a thing. There are many of those, and they tend to be about different things, right? Some are about the data set, some are about the process, the action that created the data set. Others are about people, others are about organizations, crediting, etc. And then it made me realize this is very similar to what we're doing now in Marco Polo, where our scientists are also generating metadata in tabular forms. We initially tried to sort of coax them to do JSON-LD directly, and they looked at us with an expression that will haunt my nightmares for decades to come. So we said, all right, fine, it needs to be a spreadsheet, but can we at least meet in the middle somewhere so that the spreadsheets have a logical order that's like databases would have, like database normalization. What that means is that every table is about a specific thing. Like the classic example is like if you have a video rental store, you have one table about your customers, the names. You have another table about their addresses. You have another table that links the name to, or the customer ID to the videos that they have rented, the ID of the video. And you have another table that talks about the video, like its genre, its title. So it looks more complicated because you have more tables. But it's actually much simpler because each table is about one thing and you know when something's wrong. And you just link the tables. You know customer 17 rented video 432. That's just two entries. And then the other tables have all the data about the other stuff. And you don't have to worry about that. And you don't have to repeat it because you already have it. So we said, all right, we'll meet in the middle and we're going to split these sheets. Because remember yesterday I said, the important part of having the experts in the room is that they tell us what we should be describing. And now the informatics task is to tease it apart to make it more efficient to organize either within one organization or across many. So, that's what we did. We first realized that a lot of these things are based on actions. Going on a cruise, taking a sample, splitting the sample, fractionating the sample. Those are the actions that generate the data. And in this master spreadsheet, as I call it, there are many parameters or properties that describe those actions. Like, what did you do? What technique did you use? When did it start? When did it end? Did something go wrong? So we said, okay, that means we need a table of actions, right? And so we generated it. And this is just like artificial data, but you have like an ID for every action that was performed. Think of this in your time series. You probably have this logged somewhere already. Like what happened on a cruise? Who did it? And you have some sort of identifier for it. And then you link it to a name. You can link it to a process. So like you link the action to the how-to document or the documentation, the method document that tells people how to do this action. Like the person who did this action followed this protocol. That's how you do it there. The status, is it completed? Is it planned? Is it, etc. And these properties are coming right from schema.org, right? We're not making them up. These are already the interoperable parameters that other people have thought about for generic actions. Like schema.org is very, very generic. It's for like rock concerts to scientific experiments, right? As Adam and Nicodemo already have explored it quite intensively. And then the agent, who did it? who was the agent of the action. That can link off to a person or an organization, each of which would have their own table, like a table of organizations your station works with, a table of people that that are working with you. And then you don't have to repeat the metadata each time in a huge spreadsheet. You just link to that other table, right? This is the foundation of database normalization, but also linked open data to reduce the amount of bytes flying around, confusion, potential for error, etc. And so, what instrument did you use? Again, we can have a table of instruments, right? So that again, you don't have to repeat it. You probably have a catalog of instruments anyway in your station. You probably have serial numbers, and you can use those as identifiers. As you know, and that's already immediately useful, because as soon as you switch the instrument, the identifier, the serial number, the natural identifier, will change. And so if you look back at the metadata and you notice a discrepancy in measurements, you can trace it back to why did that happen? Did any serial number change? And you have a very efficient way of querying that now. The usual stuff, start time, end time, nothing spectacular. The objects upon which the action was done. So if I sampled seawater, it would be the pelagic zone or the epipelagic zone. And then the result. The result can be text, like what was the outcome of the action, or you can link off to what the action produced, either data sets or samples, physical samples, like a metadata description of them. So that's the idea. So we already found a few things that are in the master spreadsheet that fit quite neatly into actions. How-tos, we saw it already. We didn't really populate that, but that's a table where you would borrow the properties from schema to talk about your method documents. What is the method? What are its steps? Step 1, step 2. You can actually go to the step level if you want to. That's exciting in your community's context, because if you have metadata at that resolution, but general, you don't have to repeat everything. You can already start cross-comparing methodologies very, very efficiently across systems like Otis or anything, even just internally between two. How-tos. That's like for data sets. Again, there are lots of parameters for data sets, and most of the rest of the stuff inside the spreadsheet could probably fit there. An action, let's say, I did the fractionation, I did the particle flux measurement, and now I have a data set about particle fluxes. This is where you describe it, and you would link it back to the action that produced it. That's nice now, because you don't have to repeat all of that metadata that describes the action in the data set, right? Which is sort of what the master spreadsheet was doing. And you need to do that, you need to capture it somewhere. But in informatics terms, that means you're overloading the metadata on one entity, and that's not the natural place for that metadata to live. That should be at the action level, linked to the data set, and now you can focus, so they're linked together, and now you can focus on data set metadata, like how big is it, what format it's in, that sort of stuff, right? That's more naturally associated with the data set. So what we were doing, we were just going through the properties that schema.org offers for each one of these types, as they're called. A type is an action, a type is a data set, and they have properties. And we're choosing the properties that are most sensible for your group. You don't need to use all of them. You can start with a small but useful set. And the property values is where you list the variables. Like imagine that again in your own station. You have one table where you say, our station measures these variables, right? You actually talk about those variables here, again, using properties from schema.org. What unit does it have? What error does it have? What method did we use? So you can all link it here. And then when you want to talk about my data set has these variables, you just point to the identifier of these variables. You don't need to repeat it again, unless you've changed it. So every time you run it, you can already, you can say, this time we altered it a little bit, and you create a new row and explain why. Imagine a world where like every time series station basically has manifests of their activities and their outputs in a similar manner. Even without the whole Otis linked data thing, this will make life a hell of a lot easier than trying to look through, as we would say, overloaded single spreadsheets where the properties are actually describing multiple things at the same time, and therefore it's very easy to get confused. So in terms of just information management, this is better. And in Marco Polo, we're developing some software, and this is not complicated. Your teams could probably do it too. You can certainly borrow what we do or base on to automatically convert these tables into the JSON-LD schema and then push that to Otis. So it's just like a natural link. If you have other parameters that are not in schema.org, that's fine. You can always add additional parameters to these things. But the closer the compliance is, the interoperability is a given downstream. So that's where we were. Danny, this point.
One addition. Can you discuss the idea of the total potential types that are on any given tab and the sort of did it happen, did it not happen, where you have, I guess what I'm trying to get at is in practical applications, some of this would be filled out before you go out at sea. And you have an idea of what out of the total number of actions you're planning on undertaking versus when you get back, the things that you actually did. And you alluded to that in the group a little bit. Can you go over that or elaborate on that?
Sure. So the nice thing about like these metadata types, people have thought about how you manage metadata for actions or events and activities. And one of the things that was realized early on is that not all planned things happen. Sometimes things go wrong, right? But before you go out to your regular sampling thing, you can express the metadata for your planned actions because there's this property in action called action status, right? Where you can say whether the action is ongoing, whether it's completed, whether it's failed, whether it's canceled, etc. That's just a very useful little tag to say, all right, I'm going to prepare my metadata before I go out because we tend to do the same thing. That's our process. And I basically copy paste the set of actions that we're going to do and have them all as potential actions. As we complete them, we mark them off, we say it's completed, fill out the rest of the metadata as needed, unless something goes wrong, in which case we would say it failed, and then there's a property called error where you can explain what happened. You know, like why did it happen? Why did it fail? So you can also use a lot of these templates for planning and to give to your scientists in the field, and they sort of tick the boxes as they go along, fill in the blanks, come home, integrate it, and minutes later it can be converted into interoperable data formats. Is that what you were hinting at, Dan? Yes, okay. That's all really there is to say. The software that we are generating is on GitHub. Or if you have your tech teams, you can point it to that. I'm craning my neck so much, but it's there. I'll find it somewhere. I think it's CSV to JSON as part of the Marco Polo project. And before you hate on us too much for that, the other project that won the grant was called Obama Next. So don't, you know, we're doing pretty well here. Yeah, I'll find it for you at some point and share it around, but it's a repository out there on GitHub. Okay, but so like the reason that we arrived on that in Marco Polo is because our scientists could agree that, okay, we see the point in doing this. It actually makes our lives easier because it sorts out our information. And the informatics people were happy because it's closer to normalized information. And right away, the parameters are matching something we know is interoperable. The generic ones are easy. Everyone has names, descriptions, you know, if you have an author, they have a name, they have an identifier. So a lot of that's easy. The stuff that is like specific to your field, let's say the variables you measure, that can all go into property value. Like you can describe them, you can link to their vocabularies as the ID, and you can do most of the special stuff. And if there's anything that you struggle with there, we can certainly help you. We've deployed stuff like this in many environments, and it's flexible. I'll stop there. Unless you want anything else.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Question.
I have heard more like this, it's just that I can't put it in my mind how to do it. Like that, those links that you said, I can see like, you know, sample ID, and I get that. But you pointed out with a specific link, did you put there a link?
Sure.
To
So that's a question. Again, this is just a spreadsheet, and you can write the code that would link it. So if your station has identifiers that are stable, like an identifier for every action you did, an identifier for every data set, these can be web identifiers like DOS, or they could just be stable strings, you know, like just good stable words, which probably is where most of the stations are at, right? They're not putting it on the web. And then let's say I wanted to link an action to a result. For example, here, you can put in the identifier of the result. So one of the results is a calibrated microbalance, and then this is a separator. That's a pipe separator. And another result is a data set. So that will link to the data set table. It will link to data set 00010, and all the metadata about that data set lives in the data set table. That's it. So it's just separating things. Manage your metadata about data sets in a data set table. Manage your metadata about actions in an action table, and then use the identifiers to link one to the other.
is there any data set created like this that we can use you know, to copy them?
We have some in Marco Polo, like some that our team is developing to look at how it works, but it really doesn't get more complicated than that. It's just fill in the fields, right? And if you want to link one thing to another, use its identifier. So internally in your own systems, if you have databases already they probably work like something like this already. because this is called database normalization. Every informatician should be trying to do this, separate the tables by type. The only difference would be to make sure that the parameters they're using, like name, description, whatever, match what the rest of the world can hear through things like Otis and Google and Microsoft. It's a little switch, but it's not hard. We can walk through an example, like not now, but maybe that would be a nice case. We take a few of the other examples and do the same process and show what it can look like. Nico.
I do like that, by the way.
Can the people online hear when people in the audience are speaking, or should I?
Speak louder, maybe that helps.
Yeah.
So I like the suggestion of going through an example for each spreadsheet. This is plus one for that. However, I do have a more critical question maybe. I do see the sense in that, especially when thinking of the translation into JSON-LD, making that automated. I do see where you're getting with this, totally. And I mean, we went through the process of doing this manually for JSON-LD. But my question comes to, so a data provider then, your idea is that the data provider then fills out these different sheets and submits those sheets as part of the data submission to the data center. But what, I mean, some data centers will have submission schemes, interactive submission schemes already in place, which I just would hope that they kind of update in order to fit our needs, maybe ideally. Because I don't see that every data center will accept just Excel sheets.
Yeah, sure. Totally not. Yeah. So it depends on the data center. And part of the reason that our scientists were kind of warm to this idea is because regardless of the submission step, this is going to help them anyway. It cleans up their management, information management internally. If you do have this, if you have a specific, let's say, submission process, and it's interactive submission process, as many of them do, it's much easier to find what they're asking for. If you stage your information like this, it'll be faster anyway. If it's like Ecodemo, I assume that, I'm looking for Adam or others, okay. I assume that if you've got something like this, metadata would be fairly easy to generate, right, on your part. Yeah, so get a thumbs up from Adam there. Because again, most of the work that we need the expert's mind is done, but it's organized in a way that we understand it. We don't have to keep calling and say, what did you mean by this row in the table? Is that about the process or the data set, right? When you named it this or that, we know implicitly from the design.
Well, from the data center side, I totally see that.
Right.
I'm just afraid from the data provider side that people here now will understand it after this workshop. But people who haven't attended this workshop might have difficulties.
Sure, I mean, but again, I don't think it's like so counterintuitive, and with a little bit of training resources, like again, imagine just recording a tour of one of these things on a YouTube video. I think it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I mean, because people can do this anyway, they just don't need to.
Right, I don't fully understand it, even though I haven't done it.
So Nico, I had a go after the spots thing about doing this, and I started with Excel and moved to Access database. So a simplified version of that for what I could do as a data provider. And I looked at all the different fields that are needed for the SDG, for the SOCAT, for GLODAT, for all of the different ones, and I just included all of the different ones that were required. And then for putting the data into SOCAT, for example, you just have a report. I just export the data in that format that SOCAT requires and stick it in or into the SVG process, which is very similar. You just stick it in, and once you've got all that, you can just then output the data in whatever's required.
Yeah, I know that's the point of database normalization. Like back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, when databasing was becoming cool, right, among certain people. It's no accident that things like this came up, because it made life easier for interoperability, because you never know what the next request is going to look like. But if your house is in order, it's much easier to satisfy that, especially if you hire somebody new, a new data manager. They will get this very quickly because you've separated out things. They don't have to kind of get into the mythos of your own subculture.
But I think there's value in what Kim was just saying, that what you did was generate this superset of all the
Yeah.
repositories that you are going to submit to, and you select down what you need for SOCAT versus
Exactly.
something else.
And that's
something
yeah,
else.
going back to the presentation, my presentation, that's exactly the idea. Get your house in order, talk about everything that's important to you, and then build that export layer flexibly. And this is one step in building that flexible export layer organizing things in such a way that allows you to just mix and match and squish things together and push it to who needs it.
And this time right now is what do we need to get our house in order? What is that superset that is necessary for across the template? So the one thing that was the revelation in the particle flux with Pierre yesterday was that, oh, we didn't take this approach for development of primary production and all the others that we were working on, and this makes sense. The question is it palatable? Is it possible? Nobody's balking right now. So, do we want to pivot and apply this approach to the ones that we had previously worked on? It seems to make sense.
Yes, I like this a lot. This makes a lot more sense, a lot more intuitive. It's how I have my data set up already. I think this seems more flexible as well for other use cases too.
NASA makes you do it anyways.
And that's no accident, again, because if you talk to any information manager, they'll probably want you to do something like this anyway, because of normalization of data types. So it will help, I think, just even if a new person joins this consortium, more than likely, if they have data management people, they wanted this anyway, or they have this already, something like this, maybe some properties, name changes, etc. But the principle will be the same. Yeah.
I wonder if we can take advantage of something a little more formal, where instead of our best guess, I mean, not a guess, these are field experts, but instead of our knowledge base of what we think should be in these spreadsheets, could we actually survey a small set? Maybe there's a dozen, a few names were just mentioned, SOCAT, GloDAP, but can we survey those requirements for data submission and make sure we include the right pieces so that we don't have to re-engineer this once we realize it's not suitable for a certain submission?
Nico, perhaps you have.
GloDAP has none.
But I mean, something similar is happening with that community anyway, SoCAD deployment. They want something like this anyway, to talk to each other over Otis. So they'll converge on this. And then, we could ask them, because probably what they would ask for are certain variables and certain bits of metadata. And then we can just make sure, like in terms of compliance, we talked about that yesterday, like what's the minimum set? Or let's say minimum set for SOCAT compliance. We can start defining those. And you can inform people as they fill out the spreadsheets, even on Google Docs, you can do it. Yeah, if you fill out just these two more, you're SOCAT compliant,
That's exactly what I was saying. Yeah.
So with GloDAP, when you do that, for sure you fulfill the minimum requirement. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and they've started to be compatible, like SOCAT and the SDG 14.3 are pretty similar now. Even the order, everything about them is similar. Some of them have a couple of extra fields, but if you're doing one, you can pretty much do the other one and follow that the same.
Yeah.
So they're the carbon ones, but I mean I think the carbon ones are simple because those databases are quite well organized and compatible. But I don't these databases.
It should be. And again, keep in mind, this is just the metadata layer. That describes your data, then the data, how you actually deliver that, CSVs, NetCDF, etc. That's a different question, right? That's keep in mind they don't.
The big database.
Yeah, exactly. This is just managing your manifest, your catalog.
Just to say, we've been doing some work on the ocean simplification metadata templates as well, and we've been comparing the format requirements, sort of like this with the SOCAT, etc. So we had a big spreadsheet, we put them all in and compared them all, and then with the community, we're selecting which ones are consistent throughout, and then sort of creating a bespoke. So maybe that might help.
But again, just. It's like, I don't feel uncomfortable. Usually I feel a little bit hesitant to recommend like, hey, everyone should do it this way. But I don't feel that way with things like this because it's database normalization, right? As a community of organizations that do regular measurement, if you don't manage your information in a similar way, not with the same property, but like this idea of separating things out into their own table, it's probably a good idea that you do. I mean, again, for the past 40 years or so, those organizations that do it, their informatics helps their process far more. It leads to less confusion, and it's not hard, as we said, it's somewhat intuitive. So how about that, Heather and Danny, like we take a few of the other sheets and we just do an example, run it through, and then you'll have reference points for the rest.
Yeah, I think that's great, because we're breaking out into those groups again this
We're
morning.
gonna break out into the same groups, and so we can.
So would you like me then to like float around between them and just sort of and get it going? Okay.
The particulate fluxes will start at 10.
because Root cannot join us until 10. So we could do the other ones first.
From the participants in the room, Justin and others, make sense to you also? Sanity, check. Yeah.
I have a question, please don't shoot me. Um. So a lot of data centers and curiosity centers are creating submission systems. And in order to ease the submission of data between the repositories and actually between processes. And I don't think, is there a common template of metadata used in those systems? How does this align? Is there an opportunity to bring together this type of list of metadata in order to make it easy for people? Because if each data center and this piece of work has a different template that's needed to actually share that metadata, we're going to be asking people to put the same metadata 2 or 3 times. And as an operator of platforms, we'd love to be able to supply the data that we give to researchers or data centers with this type of template, but I'm keen to understand if there's a sort of common, please don't shoot me, common template of metadata that can aggregate all of this together, making any sense.
My instinct is that there isn't, right? But this, if people are sort of finding this approach palatable, this could be such a thing.
Yeah, I think there isn't a common one, but I think what we're saying, what I think I heard, which made sense to me, was that if we can make this to the best we can, a superset, so that all those funny little quirks from database XYZ are included, then it would be fairly straightforward to write some code that would convert to the format you needed, and that would be annoying, but you'd only have to do it once, hopefully. And then you could, I want to say automate is too optimistic, but you could semi-automate your submission to database X because you've got the superset already in your big, your overarching template. I think that's maybe kind of where we're going, but the trick is not to get too far down the road of this template before we know what we need for those other distributions, right?
Possibly. But on the other hand, you need this for Otis, and many of those systems so calculate that will be Otis nodes too. So in theory, they should be able to mediate themselves, pull this in, convert it to their local standards, right? Because again, what we're trying to avoid is that if we have a many-to-many conversion star, like many-to-many nodes, multiple converters, possibly hundreds, thousands, you can't maintain it. It's too expensive, too complicated, keeps breaking.
Here, one thing I'm wondering a little bit about is sort of I know I've heard about JSON LD being used as well, which is obviously sort of something that is easier to parse programmatically than a spreadsheet would be. Is the idea basically that you might have a single converter that can take your spreadsheet, put it into a JSON LD form, and then the JSON LD form can be used for generating all, everything goes out from there.
That's right.
Because I shudder at the idea of having to go through and parse the spreadsheet.
No, you wouldn't. Like again, like as soon as it hits a node like Ecological or something, that's where they would take it, parse it, generate the machine-friendly format, and circulate that to the other repositories, right? So then the programmers can handle that. They would never see the spreadsheet. Spreadsheet is more the interface. It's like a user interface for scientists or the data managers at site, right? They're just keeping that in order, like a library system, and then the rest of the stuff happens behind the scenes.
I think to Justin's point, it's more of where you want to push that effort. Do you want to push it to the repository side? Do you want to push it more toward the submitter, the producer side? I mean, for us, we're gonna try and accommodate as we can these sort of bespoke interfaces. Like, oh, you're a time series person. Here, I mean, we're gonna go that way anyway.
I mean, as a data creator, a lot of this exists as we create that data. And we'd like to supply this to the PIs and the data centers, so we don't have to you guys and the PIs don't have to reinvent that metadata again and again and again if we go through the process.
Yep.
And what I'm keen to understand is how common is this and how much of this can we generate to supply to people so we don't have to keep regenerating that same metadata to actually make this process work.
Right. So for the repository, if any of our tech friends are interested or others, so, and Marco Polo, our GitHub organization, it's CSV to JSON-LD. And Robert Barry, who works for me at Avi, generated some of the initial software, and we're covering, these are the types that we're covering. So actions, audiences, contact points, steps, how to do things, licenses, grants, organizations, etc. So each one of these will have a spreadsheet like we saw with what we were doing now. We then, in Marco Polo, we choose the properties that are of interest to us as a project. We would do the same, add those as necessary, maintain your spreadsheets, and then run software that is similar to the one we're developing to do the conversion. Either you do that or the data nodes, like Ecodemo, which is more natural, they do that, right? On your behalf. And then they can maintain that software together with us at Marco Polo or anyone who's developing similar technology. And then we share the load, right? The stations worry about keeping good manifests, and the informatics hubs, the relays, the mediators focus on making that machine friendly and circulating it to things like Otis, and everyone's sort of not overloaded. Everyone's doing what they do best. That's it.
It'd be very helpful for me to maybe see you go through that process once of taking one of the existing metadata spreadsheets and start moving it to different tabs and just so I can get reacquainted with the terminology.
Sure. I think we can do that in the rooms.
Yeah.
Because I'm gonna have to keep craning my neck here to see that screen.
Got it, yeah.
But in the rooms, like go around and what one can do is like based on what is seen in the particulate flux spreadsheet, if you already start prepping the types of things you want to talk about, actions, organizations, people, right, data sets, similar to what we have here in Marco Polo. Here's where we selected the properties that we thought were interesting to us and mapped them to the schema.org things. So if you could start with that, then I'll come around and we can then go through it. If you get the hang of it, I think we'll get the hang of it pretty quick. This is quite clever.
Yes, you can. We're gonna head back into the rooms. Remember, not until 10 o'clock for the magic room. We'll do the particulates. And maybe Pierluigi and maybe Adam could be floaters, because I think that was maybe Justin. Wandering is good, but do try to make sure you spend time in each of their groups. Maybe we can have Audrey manning the room with the fair data primer. So people can ask questions about that.
For like fellow facilitators, all I do is just open the master spreadsheet that has been generated where the experts have already listed what's important to them. See what they're talking about and create a tab for action, data set, etc. Then open the schema.org specification site on another tab and then go through the parameters in each type, the properties in each type, and then say which ones are important. And then if there's something missing, log that to like something that the schema doesn't have that the station wants to, the group wants to talk about, note it so that we can figure out where to put it. I anticipate like the property value, there'll be a table for property values, which will be the array of variable measure, like the variables they measure. That's where the link to the nerd vocabs and everything will happen. So that's going to be an important table, the property value one. Okay.
Not particle flux has, you put in the comment section for Excel the direct link.
Yeah, we can do that. But that's the process. It's just 2 browser pages open and talking and filling it out. Okay.
There's a question about Marco Polo. Hold on a second, folks. Nick Bates asked a question. Marco Polo's funded for 4 years, and I wondered what the plans are for continuation of funding and the legacy of Marco Polo.
Yeah, so being very, they can hear me, right? From here.
I think so.
I think so, yeah. So we know that Marco Polo is a 4-year project. We have Otis as the framework that's going to last. It's supported for indefinitely through the UN. Who knows what happens, but as far as we know, it's supported indefinitely through the UN. So knowing that, we said, how do we actually finish a 4-year project and leave behind a package of data and metadata, like we close it, and the legacy is basically a subgraph of the Otis graph that is generated from these templates. So we would anticipate this technology, which is just a few scripts, it's just like a few Python scripts, it's nothing fancy, that we convert the spreadsheets to the JSON-LD can be used by multiple other projects if they don't have their own system, just to generate their manifest, generate the project graph of what they did, who was involved, what data sets were generated from which actions, and then close it, submit that to Otis, and then move on, right? So we designed this to be, you could either use this indefinitely, or you could use this as a sort of the time-limited thing, which will help you manufacture a presence in the digital ecosystem that will be maintained once the project's done. You just host it on a GitHub repo or submit it to any repository that can persist this. Yeah, that's the plan. We of course are applying for follow-up funding to Marco Polo, but the way we designed this is not to rely on that. This, when Marco Polo finishes, this should be done, right? And of course, people can riff off of this and do it the way that suits them the most, but it doesn't require that there's long-term funding for this bit to work. Again, but that's why the reason why we can do that is because we have Otis now. So we know that what we're aiming at, we're not sort of a voice in the wilderness in that regard. To answer your question, Nick, I can't see the chat.
Yeah, thanks.